Oh, this is the way to the fairy wood, where the wolf ate little Red Riding Hood. But this is the riddle that you must tell. How is it, if it so befell, that he ate her up in that horrid way? In these pretty pages she lives today. Here we are, at the end of the series, at the end of a horrible era in English history, and at the end of a tetralogy of novels that are frankly difficult to read, due to their being very, very fucked up. To finish this story, Peace takes us back to the beginning, to before the beginning. 1974, with Eddie Dunford, with, if you remember this name from that episode and novel so long ago, George Marsh, and with Maurice Jobson. Perhaps the most important player in this whole saga. Not everything comes together, because that isn't how crime, how mystery, how horror happens in the real world. Cases aren't open and shut, there are always unanswered questions, and at some point you have to accept that you might have found out everything you can find out. 1983 begins by giving you quite a lot of answers, but if you're not paying attention, which I wasn't until I reread it for this episode, you might miss them. A flashback by someone named Barry, aka BJ from the earlier novels, shows a man called Martin, aka Reverend Laws, and Leonard's dad, aka George Marsh, father of Leonard Marsh, sexually assaulting a group of young boys, BJ included. The flashback states it's happening during the Summer of Love, which puts us in 1967. Then we begin in earnest from the perspective of Maurice Jobson, Detective Chief Superintendent Maurice Jobson, aka the Owl. First person, past tense, a reflection of the fact that he's always been there, that we're going to see his dark past and learn most, if not all, of the secrets of Red Riding. He's holding a press conference about a 10-year-old girl called Hazel Atkins who's disappeared. What was happening in 1974, little girls getting abducted and then showing up later dead, is happening again, nearly 10 years later. Smash to second person present tense. And we follow John Pigott, lawyer, finding out all of this for the first time, going to visit Michael Mishkin. Remember him? Mishkin's a learning disabled man, back then a young man, who was sent to prison for the abduction and murders of several young girls way back in the first novel in 1974. But he's innocent. His case, by the way, is extremely similar to that of Stefan Kiszko, who wrongly served 16 years in prison for the murder of 11-year-old Leslie Molseed. Kiszko was innocent, and after 16 years in prison, he died just 2 years after his eventual release. He was owed $500,000 for his wrongful imprisonment, but died before he or his mother were able to claim it, meaning justice, if you can call a bit of money justice, was never really served. They caught the actual perpetrator in 2006, using new DNA techniques, in a similar way to the murder of Lynette White in Cardiff, whose murderer was also caught using new DNA analysis techniques, also after several young men were falsely imprisoned for her murder. In Peace's 1983 novel, a different man is found guilty of kidnapping, assaulting and killing all of these young girls, as we shall see. And partly the reason for that is probably because this novel came out in 2002, 4 years before the actual perpetrator was found, and Peace loves to write about unsolved crimes. His second trilogy, the Tokyo trilogy, which I also have read, also revolves around several crimes which have not yet, still to this day, been solved. The lawyer, Pigott, is convinced of Mishkin's innocence, but Mishkin talks in riddles with him when he goes to see him, like everyone seems to in these novels. He says he didn't kill Claire Kempley, the first victim in the first novel in 1974, but that he knows who did the wolf. But who is the wolf? And at the end of this chapter, the countdown begins. D-26. 26 days until it happens. As the days for Pigott count down, D-whatever, the days for Jobson only rise, higher and higher, a reflection of his awareness that Hazel Atkinson has been missing for X amount of time. Time plays a really big role in all of the novels. Almost all of the characters, but particularly Eddie Dunford from the first, and Peter Hunter from the third, are constantly checking their watches. The days, dates and times are listed at the beginning of almost every chapter, and partly it's to track the developments of police cases. Dates and times are important when you're investigating, particularly when you're investigating murders. Also, though, it's to try and keep the reader's head in place because so much happens over so many years and the narration keeps jumping backwards and forwards. You'd need to keep your Google Calendar up to date to keep track of what's actually going on. And finally, the time limits track each character's descent into hell and madness, showing how quickly these people can go from functioning, if alcoholic, coppers and journalists, into broken, or in many cases, dead men. But there's a third perspective in the final novel. In some parts we're following BJ, his story written in this childlike, article and preposition-free third-person prose, and who's this? None other than Eddie Dunford, the hero Eddie Dunford, pointing a shotgun at BJ, aka Barry, in the Stratford on Christmas Eve 1974. I'm going to call him Barry from now on because I feel like a prat calling him BJ. Barry escapes, tries to run to Manchester, but gets thrown off the bus at Bradford. So we're going to find out what role it is that Barry plays in all of this. The barmaid who gets killed at the Stratford is called Grace Morrison, sister of Claire Strachan, whose maiden name was Claire Morrison. Confused yet? You should be. But don't worry, I'll explain everything. In the late 60s, a paedophile ring is set up by a reverend called Martin Laws, a couple, George Marsh and his wife, a photographer named Ted Jenkins, an architect named John Dawson, and somebody who works with Dawson called Graham Goldthorpe. Some of the children who they abused include a child named Barry, aka BJ, possibly the son of a man named John Pigott, who may also be involved with the paedophiles. His son is also named John, so they're referred to as Big John and Little John. The John that we follow in 1983 is Little John. Possibly Marsh's own son Leonard was abused too, and possibly another boy called Jimmy Ashford. Marsh works for a construction mogul, Donald Foster, and while working for him, he sets up an underground lair, which he takes young girls to. He's kidnapped, the first being a girl called Jeanette Garland, the first of 6. 2 coppers, Maurice Jobson, along with a man named Bill Molly, aka Badger Bill, question first Marsh and then Dawson, and they work out that Marsh is definitely their guy, but having Dawson and Foster as pals will be great for them, so they keep their mouths shut. Why? Because Molly, aka Badger, has been setting up his own criminal enterprise. A group of coppers, including Maurice Jobson, have been setting up a pornography creation and distribution business, partly by controlling prostitutes in the Yorkshire area and using them as models, and also by breaking the kneecaps of Ted Jenkins, the local paedophile photographer, and threatening to do it again unless he helps them to create their porn. What Molly wants to do is funnel the money they're making towards Dawson and Foster, who are planning on building a huge new shopping centre in the area. This group of coppers would then take a cut of the profits of the centre. And to make it happen, Dawson and Foster have even got the local council member, a man named William Shaw, in their pocket. It's all working out great until a man named Derek Box gets pissed off that he's being frozen out of this new business venture and starts leaking information to the press, specifically to Eddie Dunford, the protagonist of 1974. He does this to try and convince Dawson and Foster to bring him back onto the payroll. William Shaw, the politician, has a sexual relationship with Barry, and Derek Box has been taking photographs of it to blackmail him, and he's even leaking information about Dawson's paedophilia to the press. Dunford, in the first novel, starts to piece the information Box is slipping him together, and finally finds out about George Marsh's horrific misdeeds. He heads to the underground lair, but he gets there too late. Maurice Jobson hasn't stopped investigating Marsh, even though he knows that Marsh's arrest could bring the whole thing down. So, Badger works with a corrupt lawyer to frame Michael Mishkin for the deaths of the 3 girls. When Dunford gets to the lair, Jobson has already been and administered his own form of justice. He's brutally beaten him, castrated him, and left him to die. Dunford then traps George Marsh's wife down the same mine shaft where the lair is, and on the same day, Christmas Eve, he goes to Foster's home for answers. But Foster has already been killed by a man called John Kelly, the father of Jeanette Garland, because John Kelly believes Foster killed his daughter Jeanette. Dawson also kills himself before Dunford can extract any answers, so that his secrets can't come out and he can't be arrested. And then in a fit of rage, Dunford heads to the pub, the Stratford Arms, where he kills Derek Box, shoots and injures a couple of corrupt coppers who are working with the Leeds Criminal Investigation Department coppers who have been running the pornography ring, 2 coppers called Craven and Douglas. There are witnesses at the scene. Barry's there, who Dunford lets live, and there's also a woman named Grace Morrison. Jobson and Molloy, aka Badger, can't let the truth be known, so they race to the scene. They kill all the survivors except the 2 coppers, and they blame it on the IRA. Dunford is then also killed later on in a police chase. Over the next few years, these dirty coppers try and tie up loose ends. There's a clean copper, Bob Fraser, who has married Badger's, Bill Molloy's, daughter. Bob Fraser, who's also one of the protagonists from the second novel, 1977. He is involved with a prostitute called Janice Ryan, who was also one of the models for the Dirty Coppers porno ring. And Fraser, at the same time as a journalist called Jack Whitehead, gets closer to finding out the connection between the pornographic magazine Spunk and the police. And the corrupt coppers start to kill prostitutes who might expose them, including Janice Ryan and a woman named Claire Strachan, who was friends with Barry. Luckily for them, in 1975 the Yorkshire Ripper starts murdering prostitutes too, so they're able to cover up their killings, although Janice Ryan's killing ends up getting placed at the feet of Bob Fraser himself. Enter Eric Hall, dirty cop. He's been working with the lead CID blokes who've been running the pornography business. Because of an investigation into him and other officers in Vice by a policeman named Peter Hunter, the protagonist of the third novel 1980, he threatens to expose the group. So the group have him killed. They kill a member of the Spencer Boys, a gang which has been going around robbing post offices while police resources are focused on the Ripper inquiry. The gang is headed by Barry. In retaliation, the Spencer Boys kill Hall. Loose ends are being tied up. Jump forward to 1980, Hunter is now investigating the Yorkshire Police Force, and his investigations take him back to the Stratford shooting of 1974, which he also investigated at the time, and he knew something was wrong with it. Upon arrival, he finds Craven has also been killed, possibly to be the fall guy for the pornography ring coppers. And earlier in the year, Douglas, the other copper involved in the corruption, was also killed. Hunter, who's getting closer to the truth, is killed by a man he thought he could trust called John Murphy, who was actually involved with this ring of corrupt coppers too, which brings us all the way up to 1983. Another girl, Hazel Atkins, is kidnapped. But George Marsh has been dead for nearly 10 years, so who's doing it? His son, Leonard Marsh, has taken on his father's disgusting pleasures. At the same time, Little John Pigott, is employed to try and clear Michael Mishkin's name. Pigott begins to follow in the footsteps of Dunford, Whitehead, Fraser and Hunter, and in doing so he finds out about his father's involvement in the paedophile ring. Jobson, meanwhile, racked with guilt about his covering up the activities of a bunch of degenerates and the deaths of many, many women, directs Pigott to the underground lair where he first found George Marsh, and now knows where Leonard Marsh, George Marsh's son, has been taking the girls. Pigott kills Leonard Marsh and then kills himself after reliving the trauma of his childhood. Meanwhile, Jobson attempts to atone for his sins. But before he's able to, Barry goes to the home of Reverend Martin Laws, delivers a gruesome final soliloquy, and stabs him with a knife before firing on the police, possibly killing Jobson, though it's never made clear, and then setting the house on fire. So, in conclusion, let's take a death count to begin with, not counting the 6 little girls violated and murdered by the paedophile ring, or the 13 plus women killed by the Ripper. We have Eddie Dunford, Donald Foster, Derek Box, John Dawson, Peter Hunter, Robert Craven, Robert Douglas and his daughter, Eric Hall, Reverend Martin Laws, Bob Fraser, Janice Ryan, Claire Strachan, Jimmy Ashford, one of the Spencer Boys, Dunford's girlfriend Paula Garland, Jobson's girlfriend Mandy, probably Barry, probably Maurice Jobson, and probably others I've definitely forgotten. Not to mention Jack Whitehead descending into madness and hammering a nail into his head, or any of the other people who die off of the page, or before the events of the novels themselves even take place. Red Riding is an unbearably grim portrait of crime and corruption in the police, a hallucinatory nightmare of dark events and wet days, a fictional horror story nestled within other stories even more horrific because they actually happened. These novels could not be darker. There are few more unsettling novels I've read, and that's because Peace is trying to recreate the atmosphere of what it's like to be a victim of a serious crime. There's nothing funny or entertaining about being the victim of a crime, and there's nothing funny in the books. Entertaining, well, that's something I've spoken about in previous episodes, so I'll try not to say too much about it, but Even reading prose content as horrific as that in Red Riding, you are entertained. Otherwise, why do we do it? And if you tell me it's to get to the truth of something, then I'm going to press my pretentious button and the pretentious horn will sound. It is entertainment. Why do people go to see horror films? Why do people watch true crime documentaries? However much you try and dress it up as a public service writing these novels, it's entertainment. You're complicit if you see it as complicity. Aside from that, the police side of the conspiracy is revealed in more detail at Bob Fraser, protagonist of the second novel, at his wedding to Bill Molloy, aka Badger's daughter. What they're working on is something they call controlled vice. It means that the police, specifically the Vice Squad, who deal with prostitution, pornography and gambling, control all of the prostitution and pornography in the Yorkshire area. So one of their lot, John Murphy, who Peter trusted and was eventually killed by, has secured them the offices where they can take their photographs and distribute the porn, aka the gentleman's literature magazine, Spunk. On top of this, they use their friends in Vice to start controlling the prostitutes who work in Yorkshire, working essentially as pimps. It's a great expository scene where the reader is told a lot of what's going on without actually being spoon-fed. You finally get into the details of what they've been doing, but Peace still isn't just giving it to you on a plate. And on that topic, there are still a lot of unanswered questions that come out of Red Riding. The thing is, though, it's done on purpose, and the dissatisfaction you feel at not knowing all the answers is meant to parallel the way the police must feel when they get around to closing a case. The way a family must feel when they believe their case hasn't been handled properly or they're still waiting for answers. The way a victim must feel when a perpetrator is still out there lurking around the corner. It links back to the overarching sense of unease and dread that permeates these books. This isn't meant to be nice. It isn't meant to be satisfying. You aren't meant to get a happy ending, because in real life, even if the case is solved, there often aren't happy endings. It's interesting to me that one of the main antagonists of the story is a Christian character. Peace himself is a Christian. In an interview once he said that to triumph over the brutality of the world, you have to believe in God. And I wonder if Reverend Martin Laws, represents to him the perversion of something as beautiful to him as religion, as a mirror of the perversion that has happened to these women and to these little girls. Peter Sutcliffe, a few weeks after being arrested, said that God had spoken to him through a gravestone and told him to kill the women he did, that he was cleaning up the streets for God. The way Peace writes about him, it's clear he sees Sutcliffe, in the novels referred to as Williams, as an absolute monster. But in fact, almost nobody in the novels gets redemption. In their own way, every single character is a monster. Dumford's a drunkard and also basically rapes his girlfriend at one point in the book. Fraser, while relatively clean as a copper, is cheating on his wife and is a brutal policeman when he feels he needs to be. Jobson's obviously a bad person for covering up the many crimes that have happened. Even Peter Hunter, who's presented as this well-to-do copper with a nice home, with his nice wife, is revealed to have cheated on her with one of his subordinate officers. Peace thinks, I believe, that even the most pure things can be made impure by humans, by a particular time and place, and the crimes that occur in those places. Even something as dear to him as his Christianity. That's what Martin Laws represents. Madness is another prominent theme of all of the novels. At the end of 1983, the final novel, Jobson is, in my opinion, dead, though it's never made clear. He finds himself in a church, with Jack Whitehead in front of him, surrounded by a group of young girls, and Claire Kempley, one of the original girls who was kidnapped and killed, comes and holds his hand. His hands which should have bruises on them from fighting, but which have been miraculously cured in this scene. He's one of the only characters, maybe the only character, that manages to get some sort of redemption. And even this is undeserved, really, in my opinion, as Pigott does most of the work in the final novel, to be honest. In reality, what Jobson sees is completely within his own head, or it's his final thought on the way to hell or heaven, because he's slipping into madness like the rest of the characters in these books, because of all the horrible things he's experienced, and more important, the horrible things he's done. In the brilliant chronology on these novels, on Reddit, which I will link in the description, a commenter called High Chaparral writes, "Those who do get destroyed don't even realise the game they're playing, let alone the rules. Eddie Dumford, Bob Fraser, Peter Hunter, even John Pigott all end up fucked." And this commenter's right, but it's more than that. Even those who do know the rules of the game, have put a target on their backs and a time bomb in their own pockets just for starting to play the game. And the final whistle isn't going to get called until they are all fucked too. Dawson, Foster, Derek Box, Jobson. In fact, the only one who manages to make it out alive, from what I can tell, is John Murphy, and he just seems to disappear off the face of the earth. That's one of the plot points that isn't wrapped up at the end. But Murphy just goes off to carry on living, carry on being a police officer. Because even at the end, even after all of this, the truth hasn't come out. Nobody's investigating corruption in the force, and the one man who was got his head blown off with a shotgun. Those who managed to survive their descent into madness have other horrible things happen to them. Whitehead gets a nail in the top of his head. And actually that's it. Almost everyone else is either killed or kills themselves. The person who really deserves the most redemption is John Pigott, who seems to actually be a decent guy, just trying to get on, trying to help out Michael Mishkin. But he is so traumatized by his past and the abuse he received that he ends up taking his own life. Even though I've ruined the plot for you now completely, I still highly recommend working your way through these novels. You won't enjoy them in a traditional sense. They aren't written to be enjoyed. They're there to make you feel unsettled and disturbed and give you a sense, the briefest of glances, into what it must be like to actually be affected by the crimes depicted within them. Also, I read somewhere, or I heard on QI or something like that people who know the plots of the things that they read or watch beforehand actually enjoy the medium more. So I've actually done you a favour. In any case, if you want to feel dread, if you want to be scared, to be creeped out, if you want to lose faith in humanity itself, read Red Riding. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and if you did the 4-episode series on the Red Riding Quartet by David Peace, I really appreciate it. I had fun's not the right word, but I enjoyed the novels. I really, really loved them. The next trilogy he wrote, the Tokyo trilogy, I enjoyed them too. I look forward to what else he's going to put out, and I've got the rest of his novels on my list. But as I mentioned in the last episode, I've just been reading basically nothing but Ross MacDonald for the last 2 months. And in the last 4 months, I've only read 2 novels which weren't a Lou Archer, Ross MacDonald detective novel because I'm mental. I've still got the latest McEwan on my list, and I've got a ton of other novels on my list which I want to talk about, and just lots of other things I want to talk about. So thanks again. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can head to patreon.com/JMALSTON and donate to the Charity of James for just £2 or €2.50 a month. I've only got 1 subscriber tier, that's it. You get access to a bit of content, some podcast scripts, some early releases of the episodes, music I'm working on, other stuff I'm writing sometimes, and anything else I feel like doing. And as I mentioned in 1977, maybe, I'm going to make some very slight changes to the format. Basically, I just want to talk about other things rather than books. Still going to be mostly book focused, I think, but I'm not going to limit myself to that if I want to talk about some other things. And I was thinking maybe also of putting up my radio shows. It's just a regular radio show. I don't talk much. It's just 2 hours of eclectic music I like. But rather than pay for a new subscription on my music SoundCloud so I can upload them all, I was thinking of just putting them all up here. I don't know though. Maybe whoever's listening to this can give me some feedback if you want 2 hours of, soul and drum and bass and reggae. And that's it. Thanks again.